All right, so we're going to talk about traversing arrays with for loops. This is something you will have to do on the exam, on lots of things relative to programming, is using loops to traverse lists or arrays. So if you remember from 5 minutes ago, we created our arrays this way. We had integer array, the variable name, and we stored these 4 elements in the array. So automatically creates an integer array of length 4. I don't know if I can just, yeah. Let me start a replit, and I'll show you exactly what happens like that. Better than. All right, so here is the code. You can see it creates high scores. It sets a variable to number 3. It sets the high score at the index of that variable, so at position 3 to 11. It prints out at that index and at the previous index. So what it's doing.
Can't see your screen.
Yeah.
You're not presenting.
It's coming up. Just taking a second. There we go. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so what it's doing here is creating this integer array of high scores and setting it to 10, 9, 8, 8. Then it creates this variable, right? So we could literally substitute any of the variables here, index with the number 3, because we set it to 3. So again, remember the highway analogy. High scores at position 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3. It's that last 8. It's going to set high scores at position 3 to 11. Then it's going to print out high scores at position 3. And then it's going to print out high scores at position 2. Make it bigger. So you can see it printed out 11, because that's what it set it to. And then the previous one at position 2 is still 8. So let me change this to 88 just to make it a little more clear. So it'll print out 11 and 88. This is actually a good explanation of what's going on. Share this tab again. So declare the variable high scores as an integer array and set it to 10, 9, 8, 8, 8. And you can see the positions at the top there. We've created a new variable for the index. Modify high scores at index 3 and set it to 11. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there, it's set it to 11. And it prints out high scores at index 3 and high scores at index 2. So we're not going to do that. But you'll notice what the point he's trying to get across here is, what if we wanted to print out all of the elements of that array? It would be really, really annoying, right? Imagine we had an array that was like all the students in Rochester, right? You'd have to print out however many, like 20,000 or something like that. I don't even remember how many students there are in Rochester, 15,000. You need 15,000 lines of code just to print out their names, which is ridiculous, right? So this is the way that we want to print out all the elements of an array, that challenge 3. Because what it's going to do is it's going to create a variable I that starts at 0. It stops at the length of the array, so it never goes to 6. And it goes through them one at a time. And then it prints out the scores at the index that I is currently at. So hopefully you remember from the lesson on for loops that I will start at 0, go do everything inside the block, then become 1, then do everything inside the block, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. When it gets to 6, it jumps out of the block. So it's going to print out scores at index 0, then scores at index 1, then all the way up to scores at index 5. So this does exactly what the same thing that challenge 1 and challenge do, but it does it in 2 lines of code instead of however many those are. So even better than this, rather than saying I is less than 6, we can say I is less than the array dot length. So whatever you called your array, scores, people, whatever you called it, it has a variable inside it called length. And you can use that as the limit of where to stop your for loop. So the length of scores here, I don't have it there, but right, this has 6 elements in the array. So that's why it says I equals 0, I is less than 6. So if we used scores.length, that would be 6. That's the length of scores. So we could replace the number 6 in challenge 3 in that for loop with scores.length. And that would be better programming, because that way we wouldn't have to remember to go back and change it if, say, down the road, 2 weeks from now, we realize we need 10 scores instead of 6 scores, right? If we just use the length, then it will automatically go to 10. If we keep the number 6, then we have to remember to go back and change it to number 10 later on if we change that array. So this is the what you really, really need to take away from this lesson is how to go through an array with a for loop from beginning to end. Starting at 0, going to the length of the array, and using that I variable as the counter to go through all the elements of your array. So I think I am going to have you do the challenge here. So I'm going to give you a Replit link here. Print out. So I'm actually just going to give you the one I just did. So go ahead and fork that. So I just posted in the chat a link to a REPL. So just make sure you click the fork button. It'll look like this. So what I want you to do is maybe at the end of here, write a for loop that prints out all the elements of high scores. And try changing high scores as much as you want and see if it works to print them all out. So right at the end here, make a for loop that prints out all the elements of high scores. I'll give you 3 minutes. All right, anybody care to share their screen with the solution? No one? Okay. So we want to print out all the values of high scores. So using the example from the slides, I said for integer I equals 0, whoops, I is less than high scores dot length, I plus plus, print line, high scores of I, and then I'm just going to add comma, oops, to separate. If I run this now, oh, I guess it's going to do it on separate lines anyway. So I should say print. I want them all on one line. What happened? Probably didn't flush. That's weird. That's weird. All right, well, whatever. So it printed out all of the, you get the idea. The point is the for loop here. All right, so did I not share the right tab? Gosh. So this is my for loop. Sorry, I forgot to share the right tab. But basically, int I equals 0. I is less than high scores dot length, right? The length of the high scores array. Add 1, and then just print out. We don't need this anymore. It'll print out everything no matter what integers I put into it. That'll print them out. What is going on with this screen? Why is it printing 11? Oh, because I set it to 11. Duh. I'm not a smart man. Computers always do exactly what you say. That is the best and the worst thing about computers is they do exactly what you say. All right, back to work. All right, so add two methods, add two numbers, right? Here's a method that takes two integers and returns their sum, which is great if you want to add two numbers. But what if you wanted to add all the numbers in an array? Oh, this is a tricky question. Okay, so this isn't summing an array. Take a couple seconds and try to figure out what exactly this second method does here. There's a bottom one on the screen. What does it do? You can just type your answer in the chat. Okay, so we have a few answers here. They look correct. So basically what is going on is we're passing in an integer array, a whole array we're passing in, and an amount. What it does is it goes through the array, every single element in the array, and multiplies that element by the amount that's passed in and then stores it back into that element. So basically it's going through the array and multiplying each element in the array by the amount and storing it back in the same location. So if it were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in your array and the amount was 2, it would change that array to now be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So as you may have guessed by now, everything in Java is an object, and arrays are no exception. That's how you have that length property of an array, is because when you create an array object, it automatically creates the length for you, that length property. When you say I want an array that's 4 strings, it'll create that property length and set it equal to 4 for you. So one thing to be aware of is if you pass in, let's see this visualizer. No, it doesn't. Yeah, I'm not going to focus on that. But basically, if you change the element inside of an array, it's inside of a method, it changes it permanently, right? So if we use this multiplication thing that we just did, this bottom method here, and you pass in an array, that you're actually changing the array. You're not creating a new one or anything like that. So yeah, we'll talk more about that later in the course, but for now, just know that if you had an array of grades, for example, and you wanted to add 5 to everyone's grade, you could pass in that array like we did here and just add 5 to each grade instead of multiplying, and it would do what you expect. All right. This there's one particular example where going backwards through an array well, you should just know that you don't have to go like this for loop. There's nothing magical about starting at 0 and going up by 1. That is just how you do it most of the time because you want to visit every element in the array. But that for loop is a for loop like any other. You can start at 10 and go to 1,000,000. You can start at 0 and go up by 2s instead of by 1s. Or in this case, what they're suggesting is you start at the end of the array and work your way backwards. And there are some situations when this might come in useful, not a lot. It's not heavily tested on the exam or anything like that, but you should be aware that you can do this. The key here is that you have to start at the last element of the array, not at the length of the array. If you remember, an array of length 8 has a last index of 7. The last milepost that you could visit is 7. Once you hit 8, you're at the end of the array. So there is no element 8 in an array of length 8. So when you're working backward, when you work forwards through an array, right, all you have to do is say I is less than length, and it works. Because when it gets to length, it stops. But it's not that easy when you're starting at the end and working backwards. You have to keep in your mind, backwards is tricky. I have to start at length -1, and I have to go all the way to 0. I don't stop when it's greater than 0. I stop when it's greater than or equal to 0. So if I wanted to print out this array backwards, right, I would say start at length -1, keep going as long as it's greater than or equal to 0, and subtract 1 every time through the loop. So let me get rid of the end of this just to make it a little easier to see. So it's going to print out the array forwards first, and then backwards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So again, anytime you have a question that asks you to go through an array backwards, you should have a little red flag goes off in your mind saying, wait a minute, I remember going backwards through arrays is tricky. There's something about the for loop where it starts and where it ends and how it advances that's different. I have to start at not the length, but the length -1, and I have to keep going as long as it's greater than or equal to 0. That is the tricky bit about going backwards. So here's a little quiz for you. Let's do the first one first. In the chat, tell me what this first block would print out. Anyone else care to guess? Guess is a wrong word. Anyone else care to answer? We have a few answers here. They all seem pretty similar. Anyone have a different answer? All right. Grant, why is it 12, 15? And technically speaking, it would be the way Peter did it with 12 and 15 on different lines, but I understand your answer as well.
It's 12 and 15 because we're going up by 1 for I, and it has to be less than 2. So I starts at 0. At 0, it's 12, and then it goes up to 1, which is 15, and then it becomes 2. So it passes the first parameter because it's still less than the length, but it is not less than 2. 2 is not less than 2.
Yep. So this whole middle part has to be true for the loop to keep going, if you remember. And that middle part is not true when I equals 2. All right, what about the second block there? What is it going to print out? Go ahead and type it in the chat when you're ready. I don't think it's going to print out NVM, Zoe. I don't know where you got that from. No, it's definitely not going to print out wait, actually, yes. Looks like you're getting some votes of confidence there, Zoe. So since you seemed very confident there at the end. Zoe, would you care to tell us why it prints out 12?
Basically the same thing as the other one, except I increments by 3. So it goes from position 0 to position 3, and position 3 is already greater than 2, so it only prints out position 0, which is 12.
Does it increment by 3?
Oh, no. Yeah, that's why I was like, okay, I equals 1 plus I equals 3.
Yeah. So here's a
That's
question for you. Yeah, it is confusing. It doesn't increment at all. It just gets set to 3. So let's say it said I is less than array length and I is less than 4. What would happen? So here, let me show you what I mean. So let's say I is less than length and I is less than 4. I equals 1 plus 2. What's it going to print out? This is going to be a trickier question. I like this question. Make you think a little bit. Let's do it in my array here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. What is this program going to print out? Let's predict. Probably error. Zoe's trying to cover all her bases. Just type all the numbers, all the integers that exist, and then you'll be, eventually be correct. Oh, Peter has an idea. 0, 30, 30, 30. I like this question. Forcing you to think. So Cole and Tony think that 40 repeats forever. So does Zachariah and Eric. Let's give it a shot and see what happens. You are correct. I think it's a typo. I think what that the guy who created the slides meant to say was I plus 2, in which case it would eventually stop. But yeah, that's a bug, right? You could accidentally type that in your code and be like, oh my God, why is it printing 30 forever? It's because I becomes equal to 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, and just never changes. So it is always less than length and always less than 4. Good question, Mr. Bartus. I appreciate you. All right. Here's a common error. So here are some words. Find let me give this as a challenge to you. Will this find string work? Right? It's trying to find whether the target is in the array. So here's a method called find string. It takes an array of strings and it takes a target string. And it's supposed to go through, and if it finds the target in the array, it should return the index of that target. If it does not find the target, right? If hey is not in this list of words, then it should return -1. So if the list of words instead were like A, B, C, D, E, it would not find hey, and it should return -1. So have a look at this code. I'll give you 2 minutes to look at it. And don't type in the chat until I say type in the chat. Except for Zoe, because I like how Zoe changes her mind like 3 times. It's great. You can send out some red herrings, Zoe, and confuse people. I love that. It's great. And I'm not joking. I'm serious. I love when people change their minds as they're learning. That's really great. So yes, so obviously there is an error in here. I wouldn't be showing this. So what is the error? Why doesn't this work? So I'll give you 2 minutes to try and figure out what the error is. All right. So Zoe's sticking her tongue out at me, and I'm horribly offended, and I'm never going to talk to you again. It also says it returns -1 right away if the first element isn't target. All right, so everybody else, let's argue with Zoe. Type in what you, or hit enter if you've already typed it in. And Peter says the else return -1 will cause it to return -1 immediately. You agree with Zoe. Why would you do that to me? You guys are ganging up on me. You guys aren't my favorite students anymore. Even Eric and Grant. Can't believe you guys are agreeing with Zoe. Against me. Everyone is against me. Does anyone disagree with Zoe? Fine. This time Zoe is 100% correct with her first answer. So this is a really, really common error, which is why I'm bringing it up. When you're searching through an array, yes, the first part is right. If the word equals the target, you want to return the index. But you don't want to return -1 if you don't find it right away, because you've only checked the first one. You want the loop to be able to go all the way to the end, and that second return -1 is the only one you want. Because that would mean if it found it, it would have returned the index and left this method entirely. It would stop. If it never found the index, it would keep going through the for loop over and over and over again until it got to the end of the array. And then because it hadn't returned anything yet, that means the string isn't in there. So you might as well return -1. So I would just get rid of the else block entirely, and then it would work the way we expect it to work. All right, so this is false because the word at index 0 is hello. So it goes into the return statement and exits out of the loop. So this is the, oops, this is the corrected one. Just remove the return statement. So you will have to do the programming challenge spell checker, and that's exactly what it does. It goes through the list of words to see if a word is spelled correctly. And that's pretty much the way most spell checkers work, right? Is they go through literally an entire dictionary and search for your word to see if it's in there. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to 6.3 next. So let me pause.